noted.
Thank you, Jack. I don't have a presentation to show you, so I'm just going to speak to you and read from my notes, which are extracts from the thesis that I'm just completing. And as Jack said, and in fact he gave me a very, very nice introduction in his own presentation on introducing you to Frederick Myers. Frederick Myers' work has been the focus of my thesis, and his scientific method in understanding spirit possession. Although Frederick Myers' own research was focused on looking for evidence to support the hypothesis that consciousness survives bodily death. So he wasn't investigating possession per se, but he discovered from his research that the concept of possession, in light of the evidence that he uncovered, was undeniable. And possession in the positive sense, in terms of mediumship, he worked with mediums. So what I'm going to present to you today is a proposition that there's a very, very simple explanation which is scientifically validated that can explain spirit possession. And I'm going to take two concepts. One of them was introduced earlier by Jack and referred to by other speakers, and that is the concept of the altered state of consciousness. And the other concept is that of telepathy, which was the cornerstone of Myers' research. And if we put the two together, we get telepathic hypnosis. The concept of hypnosis at a distance, as it was called before Myers coined the term telepathy, was first recorded by a disciple of Mesmer, the Marquis de Puysegur. Again, Jack, thanks very much for introducing the Marquis. Very, very important figure in the history of mesmerism. The Marquis agreed with Mesmer that the influence of what they then perceived as magnetic fluid was not impeded by physical obstacles. This meant that the magnetizer could magnetize through walls from one dwelling to another. Puysegur was not content to accept the theories of others, and he commented, and I quote, "This is the kind of thing that is impossible to prove by rational arguments, and for which experience alone," again, experience, the ethnographic experience alone can provide certainty. And for that reason, it is to men who are aware of this small part of their power that I now direct some recommendations about the best way to use it. Puysegur was aware of the possible detrimental effects of inducing somnambulism at a distance. And he recalled such cases where some patients, whilst on their way to visit him for a consultation, actually arrived already in a somnambulistic state. And he was aware of possible dangers of this. Quote, "Apart from this inconvenience, there is another one very much to be feared. The risk that some extraneous factor will interfere with the effect produced at a distance. If, for example, the effect one produces is somnambulism, one must know very well how susceptible this peaceful state is to being disturbed by the least extraneous circumstance, which can then cause truly miserable confusion." What it means is that the somnambulist goes into an altered state of consciousness where they become influenced by suggestion, and they can also be influenced by extraneous forces. And by that, the implication is suggestion from another mind from a distance. It's quite scary, really, isn't it? In other words, the somnambulist who was not being guarded or directed by the magnetizer would be vulnerable to all kinds of circumstances that could cause problems. Two important factors emerge from Peisiger's observations regarding telepathic hypnosis. The importance of experience in contrast to rational argument in determining its credibility, and the vulnerability of the unsupervised subject. According to Adam Crabtree's research, Crabtree's still living in Canada. He was an ordained Catholic priest in the 60s, turned his attention to therapy, wrote Multiple Man, and a later book, 1993, which I've referenced here, From Mesmer to Freud. So he's become a psychotherapy historian and very well worth a read. According to Crabtree, a researcher, Dupotet, attempted to produce a state of somnambulism from a distance under controlled conditions in 1820. Other researchers who investigated this phenomenon in the 1880s include Pierre Janet, Richet, and Héricourt. Distant mesmeric effects have also been reported by the surgeon James Esdale in India and by surgeon John Elliotson in London and Chauncey Hare Townsend. So this business of telepathy, hypnotic telepathy, hypnosis at a distance, has quite a history. Frederick Myers, like Peisiger 100 years before him, was not content to leave such phenomena to rationalistic argument, and he sought to gather evidence to demonstrate that suggestion was not an adequate explanation for all hypnotic phenomena. We've got two concepts here to explore. One is mesmerism, which is the induction of the altered state by animal magnetism, or this physical, unseen physical influence. That's mesmerism. And on the other hand, you've got the more modern theory of hypnosis, that it's the power of suggestion delivered by voice. Two totally separate things. But in modern hypnosis research, mesmerism is often referred to as a precursor to hypnosis. But they're two totally separate things. So what we're talking about here is telepathy. The evidence for telepathy, according to Myers, that is for psychical influence from a distance, has grown to goodly proportions, for a new form of experiment has been found possible, from which the influence of suggestion can be entirely excluded. So this is the ability to influence another person's mind without mesmerism and without suggestion. It is now, as I shall presently try to show, been actually proved, don't really like the word proved, but Myers uses it, that the hypnotic trance can be induced from a distance so great and with precautions so complete that telepathy or some similar supernormal influence is the only efficient cause which can be conceived. And he joined in with Pierre Janet in experiments with Madame B, referred to as Leonie. And these experiments were carried out at Le Havre with the assistance of a Dr. Gilbert, or in French it would be Gilbert. Sorry? Thank you. Who was a leading physician there. These experiments were conducted, I'm an Englishman, I'll call him Gilbert, okay. These experiments are described in the Bulletins de la Société de Psychologie in 1886 and the Psychological Review in 1886. And Myers comments on the precautions taken with these experiments. He says, I quote, "These experiments are not easy to manage, since it is essential at once to prevent the subject from suspecting that the experiment is being tried, which I suppose in modern psychology experiments would be unethical. It was a responsible matter to bring this woman through the streets of Le Havre, to provide for safety in the event of its success. It was needful to provide her with an unnoticed escort, and in fact several persons had to devote themselves for some hours to a single experiment. And Myers uses extracts from Janet's report to emphasise the simple fact that the subject was being hypnotised from a distance, not only with no influence from the power of suggestion, but actually against her will. October 3rd, 1885, Monsieur Gilbert tries to put her to sleep from a distance of half a mile. Monsieur Janet finds her awake, puts her to sleep. She says, "I know very well that Monsieur Gilbert tried to put me to sleep, but when I felt him, I looked for some water and put my hands in cold water. I don't want people to put me to sleep in this way. It puts me out and makes me look silly." She had in fact held her hands in water at the time when Gilbert lured her to sleep. On October the 9th, Gilbert succeeds in a similar attempt, and she says, in trance, "Why does Monsieur Gilbert put me to sleep from his house? I didn't have time to put my hands in my basin." Myers collected accounts from many other reliable sources for evidence of telepathic hypnosis. He further cites one such account contributed by Dr. E. Glay that was published in the Medical Tribune in Paris in May 1875 of a 14-year-old girl that actually initiated a series of over 100 experiments conducted under a variety of conditions. Now, I would argue that had modern theorists in hypnotic phenomena been aware of the outcomes of the experiments and Myers' theories to explain them, then the course of experimental hypnosis would have taken a very different path. I've been a very, very keen student and practitioner of hypnosis for many years, but I had never discovered in the literature anything like this because I've been reading modern literature. In fact, I went to a meeting recently the Royal Society of Medicine in London, where the hypnotic section papers were being presented, and during the break I was speaking to senior researchers in the field whose work I'm familiar with. Michael Heap was one there, and I managed to have a conversation with him, and I said to him, "Dr. Heap," I said, "telepathic hypnosis." He said, "Yes." I said, "Tell me about it." He said, "What are you talking about?" So I said, "Okay, fine." Confirmation that it's neglected in modern research. But it's so important. Furthermore, I very much doubt that the seemingly magical phenomena exhibited by professional stage hypnotists will prove so fascinating for a gullible and uninformed public. It's the wider implications of Myers' theories that begin to impinge tentatively on our most commonly held beliefs about the nature of mind and our subliminal influences on each other. And it is, for good or ill, it is my contention that the concept of hypnosis at a distance is at the very core of the concept of possession. If you consider the theory that as human beings, as individuals, we are a spirit entity that occupies a material form. And as a spirit entity that occupies a material form, we can communicate with each other telepathically. Then it explains quite simply that if there is such a thing as a discarnate entity in the spirit world, then so too can that. The difficulty that we have is our scientism and the culture that we find ourselves in, where these things are not considered to be reality, but misguided and false beliefs. But if we adopt the same worldview as those cultures and societies that, as anthropologists, we study, and take those same worldviews and beliefs and adopt them, because we're still the same human beings, spirit form occupying a material body, we can see that the principle applies universally, globally. It's just that we've become disconnected with that, from that. I'm very much aware of time, so I know I'm not going to be able to read this whole paper to you. 5 minutes, thanks, Jack. But I've got examples here of experiments that were conducted by Myers and his colleagues to test this hypothesis that mind can influence mind without suggestion. Blindfold, unspoken, it was done by taste. And I've got results here with a table of results that shows a 78% success rate in the transmission of one taste from one person. These experiments like this have been replicated many, many times in different forms by research into psi phenomena. But the mistake I suggest that researchers into psi phenomena make, in comparison with what Myers did, is that they don't use the altered state of consciousness. If they do, it's not used enough. In addition to experiments to test the transmission of sensations from one person to another, the most amazing experiments, I think, that Myers conducted 100 years ago were in astral projection, where through an act of conscious will, one person can project himself or herself to another person, to the extent that they appear as an apparition. 2 volumes, Phantasms of the Living, by Myers and Gurney, full of cases where this was conducted under experimental conditions. And again, I don't have time to go into any details. I've got a couple of examples here, but well worth looking at in order to understand the scientific basis of theory that mind can influence mind, and even mind can present itself beyond the confines of physical time and space to another person. So if we put these concepts together, we have, I believe, a case for possession that's scientifically validated. Evidence to support the case for possession comes from a variety of sources, including the eyewitness testimony of people who witness exorcisms and such like, psychiatrists and observers of possession phenomena, the subjective experiences of people, going back to what Hannah was saying about interviewing the people who have these experiences. It's no good just observing, you have to engage with the people who have these experiences. And to take that even a stage further, to actually experience the thing yourself, which is what most people are reluctant to do, but it's a good, to my mind, that is more valid method than anything. The subjective experience of ecstatic and mystical states in traditional religions. So there's a lot of different avenues and sources of research that support the case for the reality of possession. I could go on, but I need to stop. So I'll leave it there, that telepathic hypnosis explains spirit possession. Good.